Hello, my name is Cole Rickerman. I'm the Communication Coordinator for Multifunctional Portal Team 1. And I'm going to be discussing about the technology that I researched, which was application virtualization. I'm going to provide a brief overview for this video presentation. I'm going to be discussing what is application virtualization, the advantages and disadvantages of it, and how it's applicable to both the multifunctional portal project and to Allied Mountain. To start, you may be wondering, what is application virtualization? Application virtualization is a software technology that encapsulates applications from the operating system, and it replaces the runtime environment by redirecting applications to a virtualized location. Each application runs in their own separate environment on a centrally dedicated server, in which multiple users can simultaneously access applications on an as-needed basis. In terms of advantages and disadvantages, there are quite a few. To start off, we'll discuss advantages first. For advantages, applications are stored and deployed from a central server. So the system administrator, if he wants to configure any sort of application on the server, he just goes to the server location, and then from there he could create or modify existing applications. The second advantage is that users can access applications on an as-needed basis. So the central server um, deploys said applications similar to a software as a service model for cloud computing, in which users can access applications on demand without installing or uninstalling programs, thus controlling deployments for the users. Uh, and then the last advantage for this video, of course there are more, but the third advantage would be the cost associated to application management is actually reduced because additional copies of each application does not need to be saved. All of the applications are stored in one central location. For disadvantages, there's quite a few, but the main disadvantage is the existing infrastructure would have to be changed considerably if you're going to add application virtualization to it. Because of this, this actually creates quite a few other disadvantages, such as some software or applications won't be able to run on virtual environments because of the infrastructure change, and then some vendor solutions might not be able to support certain software, hardware, or applications because of, once again, the infrastructure, depending on how that's set up. Uh, as such, if applications cannot be virtualized, additional costs will have to be incurred to diagnose whether the application or the virtual environments are causing the problems if once this is implemented into the existing infrastructure. Additionally, compatibility, performance, and licensing concerns might not be acknowledged by a vendor, because vendors usually warn their users if they usually warn their users on what they support and what they don't support in terms of new technologies when they incorporate them into the solution, the vendor solution. And then the final disadvantage is that the system administrator is required to make quite a few preparations if they want to implement application virtualization. System administrators will need to research and understand how virtualization works and how it will be implemented into the existing infrastructure. And the learning curve to just even comprehend application virtualization is quite steep, just due from complexity alone. And as such, the initial cost for implementing application virtualization is quite high, simply just from training and educating the system administrator and other staff members that are involved in this to research and educate them on how application just works. So now that you have an idea of how, or now that you understand what application virtualization is and some of the advantages and disadvantages, I'm going to discuss how it's applicable to the multifunctional portal and to Allied Mountain. So as you know, uh, multifunctional portal team 1, my team, is using WordPress as the main solution to creating the multifunctional portal, and many of the other teams in our class are actually using web-based solutions as well, which is quite interesting because there are quite a few different ways a web portal could actually be made, which is why this is why I was researching application virtualization, because it's a very unique and very different way of creating and maybe and excuse me, it's a different way of creating and deploying a type of solution, if you will. And what I mean by this is, um, even though my team and even though my team is using WordPress as the main solution, uh, this is, WordPress seems like not the only solution, but the main reasonable solution that we came up with that would be reasonable for us to learn how to use, and reasonable in terms of how it affects our schedule. What I'm trying to say is WordPress essentially helps us learn how we could make such a solution due to its easy to use interface and a variety of web sources and tools that it offers. But when I was researching application virtualization, is quite different, in which this type of technology could be used very well for this project if we had enough time, resources, and budget to even go about doing this. But so essentially, from when we were interviewing with Bill, Clark, Trey, and Brian, we noticed that Trey was very interested in implementing virtual or desktop virtualization into our solution, and he was wondering if we could do that. And like I said before, and as we've mentioned in previous presentations, it's just due to our time commitment and resources and scope and budget. It's just not feasible to do virtualization uh, because of all of these constraints. But it was interesting because Trey Clark was very interested in implementing desktop virtualization, which suggests that Trey is very knowledgeable in virtualization technologies, and he alone probably could implement application virtualization into uh, the multifunctional portal if he had enough time and resources, I'm sure. But so anyway, back to how it's applicable. Since Trey is very knowledgeable in virtualization, from what we gathered, it is possible for Allied Mountain to pursue this solution because it's very realistic, and it would only require Trey and probably a few other employees to research and figure out the details to implementing this. But as I was trying to say at the beginning, instead of making the multifunctional portal a website, why not make it an application? So what I proposed in my paper, and I'm going to read a little bit of it, but is what I proposed in my paper is that you can, with application virtualization, you can make an application for each deliverable, or one whole application that handles the whole entire multifunctional portal. But from research, it seems like you want to have multiple applications, because this will get into security, but you want to have multiple applications because it's more secure and it's easier to use and configure each one individually. So what I wrote was that it is recommended to have multiple applications because each application operates in their own virtualized environment, as I said previously in this video, which allows system administrators and users to access applications from a central server without experiencing any sort of conflicts. Uh, with regard to the multifunctional portal, there would be an application for the employee database, the hardware and software tracking, excuse me, and the non-disclosure agreement tracking. So there would essentially be 3 applications under this solution, which Bill Clark or any other assigned employees that have access to said applications uh, can go in it would be relatively simple to use with a simple interface, and they could go in, they could edit whatever they need or look up what they need on a need to know basis and use it through application, and they wouldn't have to modify, well, they wouldn't have to install the applications is what I'm saying. It would be in one convenient place for all of them to access. Um, Although I guess it's not entirely ideal, in which Bill wanted a fully integrated system in which it would have both the multifunctional portal and the purchase order system in one place. I mean, I think what he wants is like he wants one software that has all this located, but I mean it is essentially still in the same. It's still essentially, excuse me, it is still essentially in one location, in which all the applications would be in like one file per se, or one server location. So I mean, it still works. It's just it would be a different way of them accessing a software, but I mean, it's still viable, in which it resolves that issue in which Bill wants all of this integrated into one area. I mean, if he has separate applications and they're all accessible in one area, this issue is kind of resolved. Um, Not only that, the solution itself also provides flexibility and security. As I mentioned before, if a system administrator wants to add or modify a new application, so if they want to edit the employee database or the non-disclosure agreement tracking or the software or hardware tracking slash database fields, they could go in there, or I should say Trey would go in there because he has the access permissions for that. He could go in there, he could look at what he needs to do, he can modify anything, delete anything, update anything, create anything, the essentially all the CRUD principles. So he could do that just from his own access privileges based on what Bill Clark requires. And I mean, it's a very customizable system if it, uh, of course, if the software is done properly. Not only that, as I mentioned before, or yeah, as I mentioned before, each software is self-contained in their own virtual environments, which is actually very interesting because it acts as like a layer of security for Allied Mountain. As we know from the first initial meeting and the site visit and several discussions after each of those meetings, security is the number one important thing for Bill Clark, and without security, he would not use the system entirely, or sorry, he would not use the system at all. So security is a very important factor for him, and actually application virtualization is quite secure, excuse me, in which, as I mentioned before, self-contained virtual environments allow Allied Mountain to isolate applications and modify them without consuming considerable resources. And not only that, it protects each application from any sort of threat that could occur if and this is if they successfully incorporate it into Azure government, which is super secure. So if they have this on top of the Azure government, their application, or sorry, the multifunctional portal itself would be very secure, in which if if one application, so if in this case, let's just say the employee database. So if the employee database was affected somehow, let's just say like someone randomly deleted a row, a table, or someone outside of the firm did that, and it's like considered a threat. If that happened, sure, the database would be affected, but the software and hardware tracking component and the non-disclosure agreement component, if those are separated correctly, those will not be affected at all. Only the employee database would be affected, so that just leaves one, what's the saying? Can't think of the saying, but it essentially just leaves the employee database in one location. So if the employee database is affected, only the database is affected, and only the database requires maintenance or uh, monitoring or overview on how to fix that issue. The other parts of the multifunctional portal should still function as they are intended, just based on the design of the application virtualization, and the separation of applications and their own separate environments. So that would play a big part in security and actually would maybe resolve all of Allied Mountain's concerns with security just on that alone. But again, it just really depends on how uh, well they incorporate application virtualization into their existing infrastructure, and if it's compatible with Azure Government and any other software that they have that they didn't really mention to us aside from Uninet. But I mean, otherwise, application virtualization seems like a very good uh, technology for Allied Mountain to research and potentially pursue. Like I said, although it's unrealistic for my team, Multifunctional Portal Team 1, to develop the multifunctional portal through application virtualization, it seems like a feasible solution for Allied Mountain, and the solution itself would only require extensive preparations to research and implement, mostly on Trey's part, but again, it still requires the extensive preparation. It is an applicable solution for Allied Mountain to pursue because applications are placed in one convenient location, as in the central server, and all applications are secured, in which each application only runs on their respective environment. Other than application isolation in the central server and potential compatibility issues with government or Azure government, as long as Allied Mountain does the correct research or conducts a extensive research on application virtualization and determine that's a feasible solution, then I would suggest this solution to them. Other than that, thank you for watching my video. Other than that, have a nice day.